Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of the Maine wilderness, a land of endless forests, isolated backcountry trails, and places where help does not reach, uncovering 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying wilderness horror stories ever reported. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Maine, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Rowe, and this happened when I was 29 years old, during what was supposed to be a simple solo hiking trip near Mount Katahdin. I wasn't chasing thrills or legends. I worked a desk job in Portland, felt burned out, and believed a few days alone in the woods would reset something inside me. That was my goal. Quiet, distance, control. I'd grown up around forests. Maine didn't scare me. What scared me was the idea of wasting my life indoors. I planned carefully, told my sister my route, packed enough food for 4 days, and promised myself I wouldn't wander off trail. The first day went exactly as expected. Wind through pine needles, the rhythmic crunch of boots on dirt, that comforting illusion that nature is calm if you respect it. But late that evening, just as the light began to thin, I realized something was wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no birds, not even wind. Just me. And the feeling that something had noticed I was there. I told myself silence wasn't unnatural. Anyone who spends enough time outdoors knows forests go quiet sometimes, especially near dusk. Still, I stood there longer than I meant to, listening, waiting for something small to break it. A bird, a bug, anything. Nothing did. I checked my watch. Plenty of daylight left. I forced my legs to move and continued down the trail, but every step felt louder than it should have, like the ground was amplifying my presence. My breathing sounded wrong too. Too sharp, too intrusive. I slowed it down, afraid even that might draw attention. That's when I noticed the smell. Not rot, not smoke. Something older, damp and metallic, like wet pennies pressed into soil. It hadn't been there earlier. The air felt thicker, heavier in my lungs, and with it came a growing pressure behind my eyes. An instinctive warning I couldn't explain. I considered turning back, but pride stopped me. I didn't want to be the guy who panicked on day 1. Then I heard it. A single footstep. Not behind me, beside me, matching my pace exactly. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped with me. Not a shuffle, not a delay. Instant. That was the moment the logic in my head finally cracked. Animals don't do that. People can't do that unless they're close, too close. I turned slowly, already bracing myself to see someone standing there, maybe another hiker who'd wandered off trail. There was nothing. Just trees. Tall, rigid, and packed so tightly together that the darkness between them looked solid, like a wall. I laughed under my breath, a dry, nervous sound, and told myself I was projecting fear onto nothing. That's what exhaustion does. That's what solitude does. I took another step forward. The footstep came again. This time, I felt it more than heard it. A dull vibration through the ground, heavy and deliberate, as if whatever was moving didn't care about being quiet anymore. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Then the trail ahead of me bent slightly left, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something between the trees. Not a shape, a gap. Like the forest itself had leaned away from something tall enough that it didn't belong there. I didn't run. That's important. People always assume panic makes you sprint, but fear like this does the opposite. It roots you in place. It convinces you that sudden movement will make things worse. I stood there, counting my breaths, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Trees grow unevenly. Light plays tricks. Your brain fills in blanks when it wants answers. That's what I told myself, over and over. Eventually, I forced myself forward again. Each step felt like a negotiation. The silence followed me, thick and absolute, broken only by my boots and that other sound. Always just slightly out of sync with my own movements now. I reached the clearing where I planned to camp for the night. It should have felt like relief. Open space, visibility, control. Instead, the clearing felt wrong. Too wide, too exposed. The trees around it leaned inward, not naturally, but as if they were listening. As I set down my pack, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were footprints in the dirt near the fire pit. Long, bare, and not human. I crouched near the footprints, careful not to step too close, as if proximity alone might invite whatever made them back into existence. They weren't sunk deep like a heavy animal's tracks. Yet they were longer than any human foot I'd ever seen, stretching forward in an unnatural taper. No heel marks, no toes. Just smooth impressions pressed into the dirt like something had learned the idea of walking without understanding the details. I scanned the clearing again, forcing myself to catalog everything logically. Wind direction, tree spacing, sight lines. I told myself that if something was out there, I'd see it move. That illusion of control was all I had left. I set up my tent faster than I ever had before, hands shaking just enough to fumble with the poles. Every time the fabric rustled, I winced, expecting an answer from the tree line. None came. When darkness finally settled, it didn't arrive gradually. It dropped, and with it came a new sound. Breathing. Not mine. Slow, deep, and circling the clearing just beyond where my headlamp reached. I retreated into the tent and zipped it shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The thin fabric suddenly felt like a joke. One zipper between me and whatever was out there. I shut off my headlamp, not because it felt safer, but because I didn't want to see the light bend around something standing too close. The breathing continued, slow and patient, as if it wasn't interested in rushing things. I could hear the ground shift occasionally, not footsteps exactly, more like weight being adjusted, like something tall trying to lower itself without kneeling. My phone had no signal, but the battery icon glared at me like an accusation. I typed a message to my sister anyway, describing where I was and what I was hearing, then saved it as a draft. I don't know why. A confession, maybe. That's when the tent fabric pressed inward, just slightly. Not a strike, not a grab, more like a test. And from inches away, a voice tried to copy my breathing and failed. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. Whatever was outside didn't breathe like a living thing. It inhaled too late, exhaled too long, like it was remembering the steps instead of feeling them. Each attempt came closer to my rhythm, as if it were learning me. The tent shifted again, not from wind, from weight. The ground beneath me compressed slightly, and I realized with a sick clarity that it had lowered itself down to my level. That terrified me more than if it had stood tall. A shape passed in front of the tent wall, its shadow stretching far higher than the trees should allow. It paused, head tilted, as if listening for a mistake. I stayed perfectly still, muscles burning, heart pounding so hard I was sure it could hear it. Then came the sound of fingers, or something like fingers, dragging slowly along the tent seam, tracing the zipper. I understood then that it knew what shelters were, and that it knew I was inside one. The zipper moved an inch. I reacted without thinking. I screamed. Not loud, not panicked, but sharp and sudden, the kind of sound meant to startle. At the same time, I slammed my boot against the tent wall where the shadow had been. The fabric snapped back outward, and whatever was there recoiled with a sound that didn't belong in any throat. The silence shattered. The forest exploded with noise, birds, insects, wind, all crashing back at once like a held breath finally released. Branches cracked as something fled into the darkness, moving fast but unevenly, its path marked by chaos rather than direction. I didn't chase it. I didn't look outside. I stayed curled in the tent until morning, shaking, replaying every sound, every movement, waiting for it to realize I was still there. When dawn finally came, the clearing looked normal again, except for the footprints. They circled the tent all night, and beside them were new marks, drag lines, leading away toward the mountain. I packed up at first light, hands numb, movements mechanical. I didn't eat. I didn't check the map twice. All I wanted was distance, between me and that clearing, between me and whatever had learned my breathing. The trail back felt different, narrower somehow, as if the forest had shifted while I slept. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened. The woods sounded normal again, but that comfort felt staged, like a performance meant to lower my guard. I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Shadows that stopped when I turned my head, gaps between trees that looked too deliberate. Halfway down the trail, I found something that made me drop my pack. My footprint. Not from the hike in, from that morning. Beside it was another print, longer and smoother, matching my stride perfectly. Whatever it was had followed me out of the clearing, not chasing, practicing. I broke into a jog, then a run, lungs burning, fear stripping away pride and caution alike. Behind me, branches cracked again, not fast enough to catch me, just close enough to remind me it could. I made it back to my car just after noon. I didn't stop shaking until I was on the highway, miles of asphalt between me and the trees. I told myself it was over, that whatever lived out there had its territory, and I'd escaped it by leaving. I quit my job 2 weeks later. I couldn't stand enclosed spaces, couldn't stand silence. At night, I slept with a fan running, just to drown out my own breathing. Months passed, then years. I almost believed it was just trauma until last winter. I woke up to the sound of snow crunching outside my apartment window. Slow, measured, familiar. I live on the 3rd floor. There are no trees near my building. When I checked the window in the morning, there were no footprints in the snow, just long drag marks along the wall. And on the glass, fogged from the outside, a handprint, too long, too smooth, and positioned exactly where mine would be if I were standing there, listening. My name is Caleb Turner, and this happened when I was 34 years old, during a volunteer search and rescue operation deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains. I wasn't new to the mountains. I'd grown up in eastern Tennessee, hiking these trails since I was a teenager, and I joined SAR because I believed experience made you useful when others got lost. My goal was simple: bring people home. The call came in late October. A solo backpacker hadn't checked in after 3 days. His last known location was an off-trail hollow locals avoided, a narrow valley where sound behaved strangely. Older rangers called it Whistling Hollow, half as a joke, half as a warning. We staged before dawn, fog crawling low between the trees. I remember feeling confident, almost eager. Missing hikers usually make mistakes you can track: bad turns, twisted ankles, panic. What unsettled me wasn't the terrain. It was the briefing note at the bottom of the report. Multiple witnesses report hearing the subject whistling at night after he was presumed missing. By mid-morning, our team split into pairs. I was assigned to a ranger named Mason Cole. Quiet, mid-40s, the kind of man who'd seen enough to stop asking questions he didn't want answered. As we descended into the hollow, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the fog thickened until the trees felt closer together than they should have been. That's when we heard it. A whistle. 3 notes, slow and deliberate, drifting through the fog like it had weight. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound bent oddly, echoing from directions that didn't make sense. Mason froze beside me, his hand tightening on his radio. "Don't answer it," he said, barely moving his lips. I asked him why. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he knelt near the ground and pointed. There were footprints in the mud, leading downhill, bare feet, stretched long, toes indistinct. They overlapped older tracks from previous days, circling the same trees again and again. The whistle came back, closer now. Same 3 notes. This time, it ended by trying and failing to mimic Mason saying my name. We didn't follow the sound. Not at first. Mason led us down slope in a wide arc, marking trees and checking the ground like he was mapping something invisible. The whistle kept coming, never repeating too quickly, never rushing. 3 notes, always the same spacing, like a signal meant to be answered. I asked Mason how long he'd known about this place. He hesitated, then said he'd worked one recovery here years ago. A teenager who wandered off trail. They found his pack neatly arranged near the creek, boots placed side by side. No body, no struggle. Just the sound, reported by campers for weeks afterward, whistling at dusk. As we moved deeper, the fog thinned enough to reveal the hollow's shape. The trees curved inward, trunks bent as if shaped by pressure instead of wind. Sound didn't echo here, it slid. Every noise felt delayed, arriving a half-second late. Then the radio crackled. Another team checked in, confused, asking if we were calling for help. They said they could hear my voice down the hollow, calling their names. I hadn't spoken. Mason looked at me, pale. "It's learning faster this time," he said. And then the whistling stopped. Silence settled like a held breath. No whistle, no wind. Even our footsteps felt swallowed by the ground. That scared me more than the sound ever had. Predators don't go quiet unless they're close or finished. Mason signaled for us to stop. He pointed toward the creek at the base of the hollow. The water flowed, but without sound, like a video muted mid-play. Along the bank, we found more signs of the missing hiker. A torn map, a snapped trekking pole, and footprints that led straight into the water, then vanished. I bent down to photograph them when I heard my own voice behind me. "Caleb?" It was perfect. My tone, my hesitation, even the way I clipped the end of the word when I was unsure. I turned so fast I nearly fell, heart hammering. No one stood there. The voice came again, closer, overlapping itself slightly, like 2 recordings out of sync. From the fog beyond the creek, something tall shifted its weight, water rippling outward without a splash. Mason raised his rifle, not aiming to shoot, aiming to warn me. "Do not," he whispered. "Answer yourself." We retreated uphill, moving slowly, scanning every shadow as if the fog itself could reach out and pull us in. The whistle began again, faint, almost playful this time, drifting through the hollow like it was taunting us. I realized I could hear it echoing differently for each of us. Slightly behind me, slightly ahead of Mason, always mismatched, always deliberate. I glanced back once and froze. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, hunched slightly to pass under a branch. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and though the fog blurred its features, I could see the faint outline of a face, or something that wanted to be a face, staring straight at me. It didn't move in a straight line. It glided. We didn't call for the missing hiker. We didn't call for backup. Every sound from us was absorbed into the hollow, delayed, twisted. Then Mason whispered, "It's imitating us now. It knows us." I felt a cold pulse in my chest, the kind that warns you life is about to change. And the whistle repeated my own name perfectly. We stopped in a small clearing, backs to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. The hollow had become a trap. Every direction we looked, the fog warped distance and depth. Sound bounced wrong. Light bent around the trees. Even our radios, normally reliable, emitted only static. Mason crouched, inspecting footprints that had appeared while we weren't looking. They were long, smooth, and completely fresh. They circled the clearing, overlapping our own steps, suggesting we had never moved at all. I felt it before I saw it. The subtle pressure of being watched, heavier than the fog itself, pressing down from above. I raised my flashlight, swinging it slowly. The beam caught something, or someone, between the trees. Tall, black, featureless, except for the glint of something wet where its face might have been. A low whistle rose from the hollow, one note that stretched impossibly long. It was followed by a second note, then a third, perfectly timed to mimic my heartbeat. Mason gripped my arm. "We leave now. No looking back." We ran. Not fast, not recklessly. Running recklessly would have guaranteed we became part of the hollow's rhythm. Instead, we moved in short bursts, stopping to listen, ears straining for anything that could give us warning. The whistle followed, always behind, always slightly off, learning us, teasing us, showing it understood our pace. Branches snapped in impossible ways, trees leaning subtly as we passed. Each time I glanced back, the figure seemed closer than physics should allow. Its elongated limbs bent at unnatural angles, shadows stretching like liquid across the forest floor. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but every instinct screamed that sound was the hollow's weapon, not ours. At one point, Mason tripped over a root, and the whistle stopped. Silence pressed on me like a solid weight. I looked down to help him, and something moved behind him, a shadow that replicated his posture perfectly. I realized with a chill that the hollow wasn't just following us. It was mirroring us. And it was patient. It would not hurry. It would wait for mistakes. We stumbled into a narrow ravine, walls close enough to brush our shoulders. The fog thickened, choking light and sound. The whistle returned, but now layered. 2, 3, sometimes 4 notes, overlapping each other, as if a dozen voices were calling out my name and Mason's at once. Our radios burst into life with static-laced voices, distorted and warped, repeating our movements and conversations. "Caleb? Mason? Caleb?" Each echo more human, yet wrong. My pulse raced. Every step forward felt slower than the last, like the hollow had taken control of time itself. I finally saw it. The tall black figure hovered at the edge of the fog, perfectly upright, impossibly still. Its limbs didn't bend like a human's, yet it moved fluidly through the narrow ravine. Its head tilted, watching us, and the whistle became a laugh, low, wet and echoing against the walls. Mason grabbed my arm. "It's toying with us. We survive by keeping calm and moving together. One wrong step. He swallowed hard, and it ends. We stepped forward, every nerve screaming, into the unknown. We reached the edge of the ravine where the ground opened onto a ridge overlooking the hollow below. I could see the fog curling like smoke, thick and gray, hiding the twisted trees and dark depressions. The whistle had gone silent, leaving only the hollow's unnatural stillness. Every instinct screamed at me that it wasn't gone. It was waiting. Mason scanned the area, radio clenched, flashlight sweeping slowly. Then he froze, his hand pointing downward. The missing hiker was there, or at least what was left of him. His pack lay open, personal items scattered like they had been left intentionally. No body. Just the impression of a human in the mud. Elongated, unnerving, as if stretched by the hollow itself. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The fog moved against me, wrapping and tugging like fingers. A single whistle returned, soft at first, then rising in pitch, calling my name from every direction at once. It wasn't just a hollow anymore. It was a predator, and we had stumbled into its playground. We didn't stay, not a second longer. The whistle followed us up the ridge, faster now, distorted, echoing in impossible directions. The hollow's fog clung to our legs, tried to slow us, tried to confuse us, and every time I stumbled, it sounded the three-note call, mocking, precise, learning. We broke free from the edge and sprinted back to our staging area, never looking back. The whistle faded, but I could feel it watching from the fog below, waiting for the next time someone would wander too far. Mason never spoke about it afterward, but I saw the same haunted look in his eyes that I felt myself. That experience changed me. I left SAR months later, unable to be near dense forest without hearing my name repeated back in 3 perfect notes. Even now, if I drive past the Smoky Mountains in autumn, low fog on the ridges, I hear it, soft, deliberate, and patient, waiting for those who dare enter Whistling Hollow. I learned one truth too late. Some forests don't just hide people, they keep them. My name is Lydia Harper, and this happened when I was 27 years old. I had inherited a small cabin in the backwoods of the Great Smoky Mountains, a place locals called Widow's Peak. I wanted solitude, a weekend away from the city, and the cabin promised quiet, comfort, and distance. My goal was simple: write, read, and escape the constant noise of life. The first night was perfect. A fire crackling, the smell of pine drifting through the open windows, and the distant howl of coyotes as background ambiance. I felt safe. Too safe. By the second night, I noticed subtle changes. The wind sounded wrong, almost like whispers brushing past the cabin. Shadows moved unnaturally, stretching longer than the moonlight should allow. I chalked it up to imagination, exhaustion, or the cabin settling. Then came the knock. Soft, precise. 3 taps at the door. No one should have been there. And yet, my name was whispered from the other side. I froze. My heart thumped violently, but I convinced myself it was the wind or an animal. Still, curiosity drew me to the window. I peered through the glass, expecting to see someone running or maybe a neighbor making a prank. Nothing. Just the forest. The whispers returned, softer this time, but insistent. My own name, drawn out in that slow, almost playful cadence, like a lullaby twisted by someone or something familiar. I backed away from the window, pacing the cabin, trying to rationalize, but every instinct screamed that this wasn't normal. I grabbed my phone. No signal, not a single bar. The fireplace crackled louder than usual, shadows twisting across the walls. And then I noticed footprints in the fresh snow outside the door. Bare, elongated, perfectly spaced, leading in a straight line toward the back of the cabin, where the trees loomed darkly. I didn't step outside. I didn't need to. Something had already come in. I tried to distract myself, convincing my mind that the snow, the wind, and the shadows were to blame. I lit candles, poured tea, and tried to write. But every flicker of flame made the shadows twitch unnaturally. The whispers returned, not outside but inside the cabin. Soft, almost teasing, carrying my name in the same slow, deliberate rhythm. I moved cautiously to the door, peering through the glass again. Nothing. Just dark, skeletal trees swaying in the wind, snow crunching faintly in the distance. My stomach churned. That crunch wasn't random. Footsteps, careful and measured, pacing the perimeter, lingering just beyond where the light touched. I reached for my old hunting rifle in the corner, never fired it in anger before, but my hands shook too much. Each shadow seemed to stretch toward me, reaching along the walls, crawling up the ceiling. And then I heard it clearly. A soft knock at the back door. 3 deliberate taps. The whispers followed, right behind the knocks, now echoing off the wooden walls as if they were inside with me. I forced myself to the back door, heart hammering, breath short and ragged. I opened it slowly. Nothing. Just snow, untouched except for those elongated footprints stretching into the forest like someone, or something, had been pacing while waiting. I stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the tree line. The wind carried nothing but the sound of trees creaking, snow crunching faintly under invisible feet. Then I saw it, a dark shape, taller than any human, just beyond the edge of visibility. Its head tilted unnaturally, watching. It didn't move closer, didn't run. It simply waited. I took a step back, and the snow whispered under its weight, footprints appearing in real time, circling, forming a pattern I couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder, matching the rhythm of my own breathing. Panic surged, and I ran back inside, slamming the door. The whispers didn't stop. They simply followed me, curling along the floorboards, pressing against the walls, whispering my name. Perfectly, I stayed in the cabin the rest of the night, sitting rigid in a corner, rifle across my lap, listening. The whispers never stopped. They twisted through the wood, curling around the furniture, following my every movement. I tried to focus on the fire, the sound of logs cracking, but each pop echoed like a footstep or a voice imitating one. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement above me. The cabin had a small loft, empty and dusty, but the floorboards groaned under weight that wasn't mine. My flashlight beam swept the loft, landing on nothing. Yet the shadows responded differently, as if something was bending the darkness itself. A knock came at the front door. 3 sharp taps. I didn't move. Another set, this time accompanied by the soft whisper of my name behind me. I spun around. Empty room. Nothing. The shadows coalesced along the far wall. Slowly, impossibly, the outline of a figure became visible. Tall, thin, faceless, and impossibly still. I realized it had been in the cabin the entire night, learning me, watching me, waiting. Morning brought no relief. The first light spilled weakly through frosted windows, but the figure didn't disappear. It moved only when I wasn't looking, staying just at the edge of perception. Its presence pressed against me in every glance, every shadow. I checked the footprints outside. They hadn't moved from their previous positions. Yet when I turned back, the whispers were louder. Still my name, but layered, faster now, like multiple voices learning the rhythm of my panic. I decided I had to leave. Grabbing the keys to my car, I glanced once more toward the loft. The shadow had shifted. Head cocked, limbs bent inhumanly. It was observing me packing, studying me as though deciding whether I would survive. As I opened the cabin door, a cold wind blew in, carrying the sound of distant, deliberate whistling. 3 notes. Slow, exact, familiar. It was behind me and all around me, following me out. And I knew it wasn't leaving with me. I ran down the narrow, snow-covered path toward my car, heart hammering so hard it felt like the only sound in the forest. The whistle followed, distant at first, then growing louder, wrapping around me, echoing off the trees. Each note perfectly timed to match my own steps. I stumbled, catching myself on a tree trunk, and realized the footprints in the snow were no longer just outside the cabin. They followed me, long, smooth, impossibly perfect copies of my stride. The shadows twisted along the trunks like dark fingers, stretching unnaturally toward me. I could feel the cold weight of the figure pressing from behind the mist. My breath came in short bursts, clouds rising and bending oddly in the air, as if the hollow itself warped everything. I dared a glance back. It wasn't running. It was gliding, silent, patient, watching me, learning me. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it already knew exactly where I would be before I took the next step. I reached my car, fumbling with keys, snow crunching beneath every panicked step. The whistle crescendoed around me, 3 precise notes echoing in impossible directions. I slid inside, locked the doors, and started the engine, trying to convince myself it would end once I left. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, reflected in the side mirror. A tall, thin figure at the edge of the tree line, head cocked unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles. It didn't move, yet it was closer than it should have been. Its presence pressed against the glass, distorting the cold reflection as if studying me. The whispers were everywhere now, inside the car, outside, even in my own head. Lydia. Lydia. Each syllable slow, deliberate, imitating my own breath, my own heartbeat. I slammed the car into gear, tires spinning, and the forest seemed to lean away as if granting me a narrow, grudging escape. But I knew it would wait. Patient. Silent. Watching. The drive out of Widow's Peak was slow. Every turn of the road felt like the forest was closing in behind me. The whistle persisted, faint now, drifting through the car's vents as though it had entered the cabin with me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure on the road, in the trees, anywhere. Nothing. Yet I could feel it, patient and silent, calculating every movement. At a sharp curve, my tires slid slightly on thin ice, and the 3-note whistle flared sharply, almost triumphant. My pulse skyrocketed. For a moment, the rearview mirror caught something, a long, featureless hand pressed against the glass behind me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, heart hammering, and the vision vanished. I drove without stopping, guided only by instinct and the dim outline of the mountains fading behind me. My cabin, the snow, the hollow, it all remained in the foggy distance. Yet I could not escape the memory of those elongated footsteps echoing beside mine. I realized then, some things in Widow's Peak do not leave. They follow. Weeks later, I returned to the cabin, briefly, to collect belongings. The forest was quiet. Snow had melted, leaving tracks indistinct. I thought I was safe. I thought I could reclaim control. Inside the cabin, the air was stale but empty. No shadows twisted unnaturally. No whispers carried my name. Relief surged through me until I saw it. On the floor, near the fireplace, footprints, long, smooth, impossibly human-shaped yet distorted, leading from the loft to the door. I had cleaned meticulously before leaving. A soft whistle began, faint and deliberate, circling me, as though the cabin itself exhaled the sound. My name. 3 slow, perfect notes. I fled immediately, leaving everything behind. Even now, living miles away, I can't hear the wind through trees without the faint echo of that hollow whistle. Some places do not forget you. Some places never let you go. And Widow's Peak is one of them. My name is Ethan Ramirez, and this happened when I was 29. I had planned a solo weekend hike in the Great Smoky Mountains, seeking solitude and a chance to escape the city. My goal was simple: push my limits on one of the less traveled trails, enjoy the crisp autumn air, and return with some breathtaking photos. The trailhead was nearly deserted. Fog clung low to the trees, curling around roots and rocks like it had weight. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Birds vanished, the wind dropped, and the forest felt as if it were holding its breath. The map I carried indicated a junction at about 3 miles in, but as I approached, the trail seemed different. The markers I'd counted earlier were gone, trees rearranged as if the forest had shifted while I wasn't looking. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I noticed footprints in the mud, my own but older, already filled in with leaves and snow-dusted dirt. And I hadn't walked that far yet. I continued, trying to shake off the unease. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted my progress. Branches scraped my arms, leaves rustled behind me when no wind blew. I kept checking the map and compass, but the junction never appeared. Every landmark I'd memorized shifted. Rocks moved, trees leaned differently, even a small creek seemed to flow in the wrong direction. Then I heard it, the faint snap of twigs, deliberately paced, following my own footsteps. I froze, listening. Nothing. Silence. Then it came again. Slow, measured, echoing slightly behind me, as if someone, or something, was tracking my exact movements. Panic rose. I wanted to run, but every instinct told me that moving recklessly would make the forest swallow me. The mist thickened, obscuring everything beyond 10 feet, and my surroundings felt simultaneously familiar and entirely alien. A whisper carried on the fog. "Ethan, why are you leaving?" I spun around. Nothing. I forced myself to keep moving, taking careful steps along the muddy trail. Every footfall seemed amplified, swallowed by the fog, then returned to me twisted, echoing like someone walking just behind me. I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly, but the mist swallowed everything. No movement, no sound, except for the snaps of twigs I couldn't explain. The trail began to narrow unnaturally, trees arching overhead like skeletal fingers forming a tunnel. My compass spun briefly, then froze. I realized I had no idea which direction led back. Panic clawed at me, but logic forced me to stay calm. I slowed my pace, listening. The snaps followed, matching my own rhythm perfectly. Then I saw it, a faint shimmer through the fog. At first, I thought it was sunlight reflecting off a wet tree trunk. As I drew closer, the shimmer took shape. A shadow, tall and thin, leaning between 2 twisted trees, head cocked unnaturally. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze pierce through the fog, burning into me. And then it stepped aside, deliberately revealing a branch-littered path I hadn't seen before. I followed the new path cautiously, heart hammering. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest was pressing down on me, slowing time. The mist shifted constantly, playing tricks on my eyes. Shadows stretched and flickered, dancing at the edge of my vision. The whispers returned, soft, teasing, repeating my own steps, mimicking my breathing. I tried calling out, hoping a human voice would anchor reality. My own words echoed strangely in the fog, distorted, delayed. Then I realized the trail behind me had vanished completely. The footprints I had been following, mine, were gone. The forest had erased any trace of my passage. Panic turned to dread. I stumbled over a root and caught myself against a tree. The shadow appeared again, closer this time, gliding between trunks effortlessly, matching my pace without a sound. Its head tilted unnaturally, studying me. And then it whispered directly into my ear. "You shouldn't have come alone." I moved faster now, keeping my eyes on the narrow trail ahead. The fog pressed against me, thick and suffocating, hiding any landmarks I might have recognized. Every instinct screamed to run, but the shadow followed, gliding silently between the trees, perfectly matching my pace. The whispering intensified, layering my own name over and over, stretching time and space until I wasn't sure if the echoes came from inside me or from the forest itself. Branches bent as I passed, almost intentionally blocking the way, scratching at my arms and face. I stumbled over a moss-covered root, and the shadow slowed just enough to hover above it, unmoving, observing, teaching me that it controlled everything here. I realized with a jolt that the forest was alive, learning me, predicting me, manipulating me, and the trail I thought I knew was no longer mine. My compass spun again, wildly, useless. Every turn of the path led back to the same spot, the same misty clearing. And I knew I was walking in a circle. I tried calling out for help, but my voice bounced back, warped, distorted, as if the fog itself were mocking me. The shadows shifted slightly, mimicking my posture, moving in perfect unison, turning the forest into a mirror of my fear. Every step I took, it took too. Every pause, it paused. My breathing felt heavy, synchronized with the soft, deliberate snaps of twigs behind me. I glanced down at the trail, and my heart froze. Footprints appeared beside mine, long, thin, impossible, matching every movement I had taken. I realized the shadow had been here before I arrived, waiting, leaving a path that mirrored me exactly. The whisper grew louder, now layered, circling me. "Ethan, stay forever." I ran blindly into the mist, but the clearing never opened. The trail behind me disappeared entirely. I was trapped in a forest that refused to release me, and the shadow had learned every step I would take next. I wasn't alone, and I never would be. Exhaustion overtook me, but I couldn't stop. Every attempt to rest made the whispers louder, circling me, pressing into my skull. My legs burned, lungs gasped, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, refusing to end. The trail twisted unnaturally, roots and rocks forming patterns that made no sense, like some cruel maze designed specifically for me. Then I glimpsed movement. A shadow darting between trees ahead, faster than any human could move. It paused on a ridge, head tilted unnaturally, limbs bent at impossible angles. I froze, heart pounding. The whispers grew insistent, almost playful, layering my own fear into their cadence. A faint shimmer in the fog revealed more shadows, just like the first, but smaller, lingering at the edges of my vision, watching, studying. I realized that the forest was no longer just one entity. It was many. The shadows multiplied, each one learning me, waiting for the moment I made a mistake. Panic clawed at me. I was no longer walking a trail. I was walking into a trap. I tried to change direction, veering off the path, hoping to escape the circling shadows. But the trail seemed to reappear wherever I went, leading me in a loop I couldn't break. Every turn brought the same misty clearing, the same warped trees, the same whispers repeating my name. Layered, distorted, omnipresent. The largest shadow appeared again, gliding silently just ahead, waiting. I could see the faint outline of its impossible limbs, bending and stretching, touching the edges of trees without disturbing a branch. It was studying me, teaching me that I had no control. Suddenly, the smaller shadows closed in from all sides, moving through the fog like liquid, their whispers harmonizing into one voice. You belong here. Forever. I stumbled, screaming, and the forest responded. The fog thickened, compressing the air, forcing my steps into the rhythm it desired. My panic had become part of its game. I realized with a chill, it didn't need to catch me. I had already walked into its trap. Desperation drove me forward, my legs trembling with exhaustion. But the shadows mirrored every move. The trail ahead twisted unnaturally, forming a narrow corridor between ancient trees that leaned like guardians, or jailers. The fog thickened, almost solid, pressing against my skin, muffling my cries. Every instinct screamed to stop, but I couldn't. I had to survive. The largest shadow glided just ahead, limbs bending impossibly as it moved without sound. The smaller shadows circled behind, creating a cage of silence and fog. Their whispers layered into one, a cold chorus echoing through my mind. There's no leaving. There's no escape. Suddenly, I saw the trail disappear entirely beneath a canopy of fog and twisted branches. I stumbled, gripping a tree for support, and the shadows halted, just for a moment, allowing me to see clearly that I was surrounded. The forest had claimed me. It didn't need to touch me. I was trapped. I don't remember how long I was there. Hours, maybe days. Time lost all meaning. The shadows didn't chase me. They simply existed, guiding, teaching, waiting. The whispers became constant, repeating my name, layering over my thoughts, eroding every memory of the outside world. When I finally stumbled into a faint clearing, I thought I saw daylight. Relief surged, but it was a trick. The fog lifted just enough to reveal dozens of footprints surrounding me, mine and others, elongated and impossible, leading nowhere. The shadows receded slightly, watching, patient. I realized then that the forest didn't take people away. It didn't need to. It made them part of the trail, part of its whispers, part of its endless loops. I survived. I escaped the vanishing trail. But every time I hear the wind rustle through trees, I feel it following, learning, waiting for the next hiker who dares to enter its fog. Some trails never let you go. My name is Jared Coleman, and this happened when I was 31. I had decided to tackle a solitary overnight hike along a rarely used back trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, drawn by the promise of untouched wilderness and isolation. My goal was simple: escape the city, disconnect and feel alive in the raw heart of the forest. The first few miles were peaceful, birds calling softly, the wind rustling golden leaves, and the distant roar of a waterfall. The trail narrowed, becoming less maintained, and I realized I was likely the only person on it for miles. But as the sun dipped, the forest seemed to exhale. The shadows deepened unnaturally, stretching across the trail, moving independently of the fading light. I stopped to adjust my backpack and caught movement in the corner of my eye, a figure, perhaps a hiker, far ahead. I waved, but it didn't respond. Then it vanished. No trail of movement, no crunch of leaves, nothing. Just gone. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was a trick of light or a deer stepping behind a tree. But as I continued, I noticed the trail itself seemed different. Rocks I had passed earlier were shifted, fallen branches rearranged, and the subtle sounds of the forest, the creak of trees, the rustle of leaves, echoed oddly, almost like someone else was moving just behind me. The sensation of being followed grew heavier with each step. My own footsteps seemed to multiply, overlapping with faint, softer ones that mirrored my pace exactly. I stopped and called out, expecting to hear a human voice, but the only reply was a faint echo of my own words, stretched and distorted. Then the whisper came. Clear, slow, deliberate. "Jared, don't stop walking." I spun around. Nothing. Only the dense fog rolling through the trees, thickening, curling like fingers. My heartbeat slammed in my chest as I realized whatever was here wasn't human. I forced myself to keep walking, trying to convince my mind that the forest was playing tricks. But the trail became stranger with every step. Branches blocked the path where there had been none before. Rocks jutted out at impossible angles, and the ground beneath my feet seemed softer, almost alive. The echoes of my own footsteps multiplied, overlapping in an unnatural rhythm, like a recording looping endlessly behind me. Then I saw it clearly. A faint silhouette ahead, perfectly still, mimicking my posture. Every movement I made, it mirrored. I froze, and it froze. My breath quickened. I tried to call out, but my voice returned warped, distorted, each syllable stretched and slowed. The forest seemed to lean closer, compressing around me, listening. The whisper followed, soft and deliberate. "You shouldn't have come alone." Panic set in. I turned to run, but the trail behind me had vanished. I was trapped in a forest that had rewritten itself around me, and the echo was everywhere. I tried to force calm, telling myself to map landmarks, look for familiar trees. But everything shifted. Rocks, roots, and fallen branches moved subtly with every glance. The silhouette ahead glided closer, soundless, its head cocked unnaturally. My heartbeat slammed in my chest, matching the distorted echoes of my footsteps. The whispers multiplied, layering my name, my fears, my doubts, until I couldn't tell what was real. I stumbled over a root and fell to my knees. When I looked up, the figure was closer, its features still obscured by fog, but I felt it observing every inch of me. Then I noticed smaller shadows moving at the edge of the fog, silent and patient, circling me slowly. I realized I wasn't just being followed, I was being studied. Every panic-filled step, every faltering motion, recorded, mirrored, anticipated. The forest wasn't alive, it was aware, and I was its prey. I scrambled to my feet, forcing myself to move faster, but every step felt heavier than the last. The trail twisted and narrowed, bending unnaturally, as if guiding me toward some hidden destination. The shadows flitted just beyond the fog, gliding effortlessly, silent, studying me. The whispers became a chorus, layering over themselves, repeating my name with an almost mocking familiarity. I realized that the echoes of my own movements had multiplied. My footsteps sounded behind me even when I stood still, and my own voice returned warped, stretched, carrying subtle hints of laughter. The forest was no longer just a setting. It was a predator, aware of every instinct, anticipating every decision. A faint glow appeared ahead, like a lantern, warm and inviting in the gray fog. Relief surged, but instinct screamed that it was a trap. The silhouette froze near the light, mimicking my posture. and I knew it wasn't human. It was waiting for me to take the final step. I swallowed hard. I had no choice. I approached the glow, heart hammering, every nerve screaming to turn back. The silhouette stepped aside, motionless but clearly aware of my presence, revealing a small clearing with an abandoned campsite. Fire pit cold, tarp shredded, supplies long gone. I realized I'd been walking into a scene frozen in time, left by someone or something before me. The whispers intensified, now layered with faint echoes of other voices. Human but distant, crying, calling out names I didn't recognize. The fog thickened, swirling around my legs like grasping hands, and I felt the shadows pressing in from every side. I tried to back away, but the trail had vanished. The clearing felt alive, bending subtly, guiding me closer to the glow. Every instinct told me to flee, but the forest didn't allow choice. The silhouette loomed at the edge, observing, patient, its limbs bending unnaturally, impossibly, in ways no human body should. I realized then, the echo had a pattern, and I was part of it. I tried to retreat, but the clearing seemed to stretch endlessly, folding in on itself. Every step backward brought me to the same cold fire pit. The whispers surrounded me now, a chorus of unseen voices calling my name, layering over each other until it became impossible to separate reality from illusion. The tall shadow glided closer, its elongated limbs bending in ways that made no sense. The smaller shadows emerged from the fog, circling me like predators. I realized that I had been walking into this moment all along, every step anticipated, mirrored, used against me. Panic clawed at my chest, but my body refused to move. Then the light shifted, revealing faint footprints around the campsite, dozens of them, some human, some impossibly long, all leading in a circle. The shadows paused, as if satisfied I had seen their work. And the echo, the sound of my own name, grew louder, resonating in the fog, forcing me to understand the truth. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. I stumbled, trying to run, but the ground seemed to shift beneath me, guiding me in a loop back to the same fire pit. The tall shadow hovered at the edge, silent, observing, while the smaller shadows glided around, perfectly synchronized with my steps. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the echoes of my own movements, amplified and distorted, bound me in place. The whispers converged into one chilling phrase: "You belong here." My own voice, warped, repeated the same words back to me. The fog thickened, almost tangible, pressing against my chest, and I felt the forest's awareness, alive and sentient, studying me like a puzzle to solve. I realized then that the hiker's echo wasn't a single entity. It was the forest itself, patient, cunning, a predator that learned, waited, and mirrored its prey. And I had walked directly into its trap. I was not leaving this place untouched. Exhaustion and terror fused as I stumbled forward. Yet no matter which way I turned, I ended back at the same clearing. The fire pit glowed faintly, though the wood was cold, and the fog swirled unnaturally around it. The shadows glided closer, but they didn't attack. They only watched, patient, deliberate, like teachers overseeing a lesson I hadn't signed up for. The whispers became deafening, layering my name, my thoughts, and the memories of other hikers, past and lost, until the air felt solid, pressing against my ears and chest. I realized the forest didn't need to harm me physically. It could trap me in a loop of fear, echoing my own panic until I became part of its collection. I tried to scream, but my own voice was twisted into multiple echoes, repeating and distorting, a cacophony that filled the fog. Every step I took was mirrored perfectly by the shadows. Every thought I had seemed anticipated. I understood then. The forest had already won. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time no longer existed. The clearing and shadows became inseparable from my consciousness. I realized the echo wasn't just mimicry. It was memory, history and fear trapped in the forest, now attached to me. Every panic-filled breath, every faltering step, every whisper of my own name became part of its collection. I stumbled into the faintest glimmer of dawn, thinking I had escaped. But the shadows lingered at the edge of the fog, patient and knowing. My reflection in a pool of rainwater didn't match my movements perfectly. There were subtle distortions, elongated limbs, a faint, faceless shape that mirrored me exactly. I ran blindly, leaving the clearing behind, but the whispers followed, stretching into the trees, echoing my name over and over. I survived the hiker's echo, but I am not the same. Every time I return to the mountains, I hear it, the echo of my own fear, waiting for the next hiker foolish enough to follow its whispers. Some trails are never empty. My name is Lena Harper, and this happened when I decided to spend a weekend alone in the Great Smoky Mountains. I had rented an isolated cabin deep in the woods, drawn by the promise of solitude and the chance to finish my latest novel without distractions. The GPS cut out miles before the cabin, and I relied on the overgrown trail to guide me through the dense forest. The first night was quiet, almost serene. The mist rolled in thick over the valley, curling around the cabin like a living thing. I settled by the fireplace with my notebook, writing the opening chapter. But as the night deepened, subtle sounds began to disturb the silence. Ahs, soft scratches on the wooden walls, faint creaks from the loft above, and the whisper of movement outside. At first, I told myself it was the wind, the trees, the forest settling. But then I saw it, a shadow moving just beyond the window, tall and distorted, observing silently. I froze. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the fog, a tree branch illuminated by the cabin light. But the shadow didn't move like a tree. It twisted unnaturally, shifting as if aware of my gaze. My heart raced. I grabbed a flashlight, stepping to the door. But the mist outside seemed to thicken at the edges, swallowing the beam almost immediately. The scratching sounds returned, louder now, from the back of the cabin, near the loft stairs. I called out, my voice trembling, but no answer came. Only the echo of my own words bouncing back distorted, as if the cabin itself were mimicking me. The shadow at the window didn't vanish. Instead, it leaned closer, tilting its head unnaturally, studying me. I realized that I was being watched. Not just observed, but studied. Every movement I made was noted, every hesitation recorded. The mist wasn't just outside. It was part of it, reaching in, curling around the edges of the cabin like cold fingers. And I knew, deep down, I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was my imagination, that the isolation had made me paranoid. I went back to my notebook, but every scratch on the wooden walls, every creak of the loft above, made my hands shake. The fire flickered, shadows dancing unnaturally across the walls. I glanced out the window, and the tall, distorted figure was still there. Closer now, almost pressed against the glass. A cold dread filled my chest. The mist outside swirled thicker, and faint footprints appeared on the damp ground, leading in no logical direction, stopping just short of the cabin. I could hear soft, deliberate whispers, low and layered, echoing my own thoughts. Each word felt like it came from inside my head, a voice I both recognized and feared. I realized I hadn't been alone since I arrived. Something had been waiting, studying the cabin, waiting for the darkness to grow thick enough to reach me. And now, it was patient no more. I tried to summon courage and investigate the loft, each step of the creaking stairs echoing in the cabin like a warning. The whispers grew louder, layering over each other, repeating my name, my fears, my every thought. I reached the loft and froze. The wooden floorboards were scratched deeply, patterns etched into the surface like some ritual symbol, dark and jagged. A chill ran through me as the shadows seemed to move inside the cabin now, no longer confined to the window. The firelight flickered violently, and I saw movements in the corners of my vision. Elongated forms stretching toward me, twisting unnaturally, almost human, almost something else. The mist outside pressed against the windows, like a living thing obscuring the world beyond. I backed away, heart hammering, and realized the cabin was no longer a safe haven. It was a cage. The figure outside, the whispers, the shadows. They had claimed this place, and they had claimed me. I tried to calm myself, telling myself to rationalize the fear. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, thinking that maybe the mist had distorted shadows or that I could find evidence that I was imagining things. But the moment I touched the cabin door, the mist thickened instantly, cold and wet against my skin, swallowing the path behind me. The shadow waited just beyond the glow of my flashlight, taller, darker, limbs bending impossibly. I could see no face, just an outline that twisted subtly, unnaturally, like liquid moving against gravity. Whispers layered over each other, repeating my own fears back to me, looping endlessly. The ground around the cabin was disturbed, prints forming circles around me as if the mist itself had guided them. I stumbled backward toward the door, heart hammering, and realized the shadow was guiding me, teaching me something I didn't want to know. The cabin had never been abandoned. It had always belonged to it. I wasn't safe anywhere. I forced myself to re-enter the cabin, slamming the door behind me. The shadows followed, faintly visible in the corners, stretching and bending toward me. The whispers pressed into my mind, repeating my thoughts before I could even form them. I felt a pressure in my chest, like the mist itself had entered, wrapping around me, bending reality, reshaping the cabin into a trap. The loft above creaked again, and I forced my gaze upward. The scratches on the floorboards now appeared to move subtly, forming new patterns, intricate and alive, almost as if guiding me toward something. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I could see the figure from the window reflected in the glass, inside the cabin, impossibly close. I realized with a shiver that the shadow had learned the cabin, learned me. The mist, the whispers, the scratches, they were all part of its consciousness, and it was patient. It didn't need to chase me. I was already trapped. I could no longer ignore it. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow seemed to converge, pressing down on me from all sides. I gripped the flashlight like a lifeline and moved toward the loft, every step echoing unnaturally in the tight space. The fire flickered violently, casting long, twisting shapes across the walls that seemed almost sentient. As I reached the loft stairs, I saw it clearly. A faceless figure standing at the edge of the mist that seeped inside the cabin. Taller than any human, limbs bending at impossible angles. Smaller shadows flickered behind it, like extensions of its will, sliding across the walls and floors without touching the ground. The whispers became coherent, layering together. You cannot leave. You belong here. Fear rooted me in place. I realized the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, aware, and patient. It didn't just watch, it studied, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I had been bait from the start. I stumbled backward, trying to escape, but the cabin seemed to stretch and bend, the walls elongating subtly as if the structure itself were alive. The whispers layered over my own voice, repeating my fear in endless loops. The shadow moved closer without a sound, limbs bending in impossible angles, circling me like a predator. I tried to find the door, but it wasn't where it should have been. The mist had filled the cabin completely, wrapping around me like cold chains. The fire sputtered, and in the shadows, I caught glimpses of previous victims. Figures hunched and faceless, trapped in loops of fear, their eyes hollow and empty. Panic consumed me, but I realized the forest, the cabin, and the mist weren't trying to harm me physically. It was teaching me, testing me, claiming me. Every instinct, every memory, every thought was recorded. I was no longer a guest. I was part of the cabin's consciousness. I understood then. I might never leave. Desperation took over. I lunged toward where the door should have been, but the cabin warped, stretching the walls, bending the floors, disorienting me completely. The whispers escalated into a deafening chorus, repeating my fears and memories, layering them until I couldn't tell which thoughts were mine. Every shadow mirrored my movements, every creak of the floorboards anticipated my steps. The faceless figure moved closer, gliding effortlessly over warped surfaces, its smaller shadow extensions circling me like blades in slow motion. The mist pressed in, thick and tangible, almost alive, curling around my legs and arms, slowing me down. I realized then that the cabin wasn't trying to trap me physically. It was reshaping my mind, binding me with fear, twisting reality to make me part of its collection. I screamed, but my voice returned warped and echoed endlessly, bouncing off the mist and shadows. There was no escape, only observation, only the cabin, only it, only hours, or perhaps minutes, passed. Time had no meaning. The cabin, the shadows, and the mist had become inseparable from my consciousness. I realized the echoes of my own fear had been collected, stored, and mirrored by the faceless entity and the cabin itself. My reflection in a rain-spotted window didn't match my movements perfectly. Limbs stretched slightly, posture warped, eyes hollow. The whispers softened, almost satisfied, repeating one chilling phrase: "You belong here now." I stumbled backward toward the fire pit, which had gone cold, and the shadows receded slightly, as if granting me a hollow reprieve. I escaped the cabin physically, but the mist and whispers followed me into the woods, a constant reminder that I was forever marked. I survived the night, but I am not the same. The cabin in the mist had claimed part of me, and every time I return to the mountains, I hear it. The echoes of the mist, patient, waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to wander too far. Some places are never empty. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened when I went camping alone in the Great Smoky Mountains to test my skills as a wilderness photographer. I had always loved solitude, the quiet of the forest, and the way the mountains swallowed all sound except for the whisper of wind and the occasional bird call. I set up camp on a ridge, high above the valley floor, with a perfect view of the surrounding peaks. The first evening was peaceful. A fire crackled softly, and the golden light of sunset spilled over the hills. But as darkness fell, the quiet shifted. I noticed a figure at the edge of the ridge across from me, tall, unnaturally still, watching. At first, I thought it was another camper, but no sound came, no movement beyond its silent observation. I felt a chill creep down my spine. I was alone, or so I thought. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the fading light, that the shadows were merging with the trees. I set up my camera to photograph the sunset, hoping to capture beauty. But every frame showed the figure closer, impossibly, still watching. My heart pounded as I noticed it didn't move like a person. It seemed to glide silently across the ridge, limbs elongated, head tilted unnaturally, always keeping me in view. I called out tentatively, but the wind swallowed my voice. No reply, no rustle, only the constant, unblinking presence of the watcher. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but the trail down the ridge was long, dark, and unfamiliar. I realized with a sinking feeling that the watcher had no intention of leaving. Whatever it was patient. It had been observing, waiting, and it knew I was alone. Night fell fully, and the forest around me seemed to hold its breath. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that twisted and danced across the ridge. I couldn't stop glancing at the opposite slope, where the watcher remained. Every time I looked away, I felt its gaze, as though it existed not only in the world, but inside my mind. I tried to focus on my camera, hoping the lens would somehow give me evidence, but each frame revealed something impossible. The watcher's form seemed to shift subtly, limbs elongating and contracting, head tilting at unnatural angles, its presence growing taller and darker with every passing minute. The ridge around it blurred and shimmered, as if reality itself bent to accommodate it. A sudden rustle from behind made me jump. I spun, flashlight cutting through the dark. But the forest appeared empty. The whispers of the wind carried a new weight, like a warning. I realized then, the watcher was not just observing, it was learning, adapting, waiting for me to make the first mistake. I tried to sleep, forcing myself into the tent, but the presence outside made rest impossible. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind felt deliberate, as though the watcher was testing me, predicting my reactions. Shadows pressed against the tent walls, stretching unnaturally as the firelight flickered. At one point, I peeked outside. The watcher had moved closer, though there was no sound of travel, no rustling of leaves, just a tall, still silhouette emerging from the mist, limbs bending in ways no human body could. Its gaze felt tangible, burning into me, rooting me to the spot. I fumbled with my camera, desperate to document its presence, but the lens seemed useless. The figure blurred, distorted, impossible to capture clearly. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The watcher wasn't bound by the rules of our world. It was something else entirely, patient, intelligent, and utterly in control. I understood then. Leaving alive would require more than courage. It would require cunning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being studied. Every move I made, every breath I took, seemed anticipated. The ridge, the trees, even the fog itself, conspired to keep me within its gaze. I grabbed my flashlight and camera, determined to confront whatever this watcher was. Stepping out of the tent, I aimed the beam at the distant silhouette. It didn't flinch. Its elongated limbs shifted subtly, impossibly, bending in ways that defied reality, and the mist around it seemed to part almost reverently. I could hear nothing, no wind, no rustle, no birds, only a suffocating silence that pressed into my chest. My own heartbeat roared in my ears. The watcher took a single step, yet the ridge between us remained unchanged. I realized with a shiver that distance meant nothing. It could appear anywhere, and the ridge, the forest, the shadows themselves were its domain. I was already inside its world, trapped in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I tried to retreat to the tent, but every step felt wrong. The ridge seemed to shift subtly under my feet, twisting paths I had known moments before. The whispers of wind, or was it the watcher itself, carried a strange cadence, echoing my own movements, my own fears, and I realized with terror that it wasn't the forest I feared. It was me. The shadow moved closer, gliding effortlessly, defying physics. Smaller, thinner shapes peeled from the fog around it, stretching and bending like extensions of its will, forming a circle around me. The firelight flickered violently, casting monstrous shapes on the ground that didn't belong to any tree or rock. I gripped my camera, hoping to document something real. But the lens showed only distortion, an impossible form that defied capture. My pulse raced. The watcher wasn't merely observing, it was shaping reality, rewriting the rules around me, claiming the ridge as its stage. And I was its unwilling audience. Panic began to claw at me, but I forced myself to focus. I could feel the watcher's presence in every shadow, in every breath of fog. I raised my flashlight and pointed it toward the ridge. But the figure wasn't where I expected. It had shifted impossibly, now standing on a tree branch that should have held no weight, limbs bending at unnatural angles. The smaller shadow forms spun around me like sentinels, silent, patient, observing. My own heartbeat echoed in my ears, and I realized I could no longer trust my senses. Every movement I made seemed anticipated, mirrored, twisted. The ridge beneath me was no longer stable. It felt alive, shifting subtly, as though the watcher commanded it. A low, almost inaudible hum filled the air. It was neither wind nor animal, something else entirely. The watcher tilted its head, as though studying me, and I understood that it didn't need to chase me. I had already entered its world, and now I would play by its rules, or be consumed by them. I backed toward my tent, trying to find safety, but the ridge seemed endless. The watcher followed silently, gliding over rocks and fog, its smaller shadows undulating like living smoke. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I realized the ridge itself was no longer a physical space. It was a trap, a maze crafted by its will. The whispers returned, layering over one another, repeating my thoughts before I could think them, twisting my mind into knots. I glimpsed the watcher's reflection in my camera's lens, but the image was impossible. Limbs stretched in impossible angles, a faint glow in the faceless head, shadows swirling like liquid around it. I stumbled, heart hammering, and knew I was completely within its control. The ridge, the mist, the shadows. They were extensions of its consciousness, and it had already claimed my attention, my fear, my very perception. Escape was no longer a matter of speed. It was a matter of outsmarting something that was everywhere and nowhere all at once. I knew I had to act before the watcher closed the distance completely. My mind raced for a plan, but the ridge itself seemed alive, shifting subtly, disorienting me at every step. The mist thickened, curling around me like icy fingers, and the smaller shadows began moving faster, circling me with predatory precision. I raised my camera to capture the watcher one final time. The lens revealed something impossible. The figure's form stretched across the ridge, limbs bending like smoke, multiple faceless heads tilting in unison, watching me. I could feel its awareness, every instinct of mine mirrored, every breath anticipated. Panic turned to raw terror. I screamed, but my voice returned warped, echoing endlessly, looping back into my ears. The watcher didn't need to chase me physically. It had already trapped me in its perception, where fear became reality, and the ridge itself had become its instrument. I was caught in its game, and the watcher's patience was absolute. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed, time meaningless under the watcher's gaze. I realized the ridge, the fog, the shadows, and the Watcher itself were not separate entities. They were extensions of the same consciousness, a single predator. My movements, thoughts, and fears had been studied and catalogued. The whispers softened into a chilling clarity. You are ours now. I stumbled toward the trail leading down the ridge, desperate for any sign of normalcy. But the Watcher remained in my peripheral vision, always just at the edge of perception, its smaller shadows flickering like living smoke. I reached the bottom of the trail at first light, heart pounding, but the ridge behind me seemed to linger, its contours etched into my mind forever. I survived the night, but the Watcher has marked me. Every time I return to the mountains, I feel its gaze, patient and unyielding, reminding me that some presences do not need to move to hunt. They already own the space you thought was yours. Some ridges are never empty. Tonight, we've journeyed through the darkest corners of the Great Smoky Mountains, witnessing 7 true encounters that prove the wilderness holds more than just beauty. It holds secrets, patience, and terror, from isolated cabins swallowed by mist to faceless watchers on remote ridges and shadows that bend reality itself. Each story reminds us that danger often lurks not in motion, but in waiting. These were not legends or campfire tales. They were documented experiences from ordinary people who ventured too far, stayed too long, or simply looked in the wrong direction. Each encounter leaves a mark, a lingering awareness that the forest, the mountains, and the mist are alive in ways we may never fully understand. As the echoes of their fear fade into the darkness, remember, some places are never empty. Some presences never leave. Stay cautious, stay aware, and always respect the shadows. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.